This episode is sponsored by Compassion and Choices. Leading with a health equity lens, Compassion and Choices aims to empower everyone to make informed decisions about end-of-life care. All communities should have the information and resources to chart their end-of-life journey. Motivated by the impact of racism, inequity, and disparities in end-of-life care, they are connecting with people nationwide to spread the word about the importance of end-of-life care planning and accessing quality end-of-life care. All right, everyone. We're here with episode 404 with Compassion and Choices. I am your host, Stephen Starks. To my right, I have Greg, Shalika, Jim, and to my left, my co-host, Elijah with Compassion and Choices. We are here on this last episode that we're going to talk about grief and advanced care directives. So, Elijah, what's hot off the press, man? Let's go ahead and dive straight into it.
Well, I really appreciate that, Stephen. And, this is so important. This being our fourth episode, this has been excellent. Our last episode was just beautiful in terms of, the content and talking about, equity in end-of-life care. And here we want to transition, really finally talking about advanced care directives and grief. Okay. And what we mean by that is, how are people actually choosing what they want at the end of life? Right. Sometimes that might be in palliative care. Sometimes that might be in other situations where we need to know what you do and do not want to do. And so, as simple as creating a will, well, that's an advanced care directive, but that's just one of many, right? Yeah. And depending on what state you live in, there's kind of local kind of considerations that need to take place. So this conversation is extremely important. Absolutely. Especially because when we talk about grief, we're talking about something that's really personal to all of us. Absolutely. There's a statistic that says that 1 in 5 Black folks in this country have actually experienced 3 or 4 deaths already by the age of 40 or 50 or something like that, which is high, extremely high. Wow. Myself personally, I lost my cousin this summer, and he transitioned, and so I felt that grief piece heavy, right? Yeah. But I know that unfortunately, because he was 29, his family did not know anything about what he wanted for his end of life, or any of his kind of will or anything. None of that was completed. Mm-hmm. So I'm experiencing now something that is very personal, and so it's great to have the folks that we have on this panel today to help guide us through what do we do when something like that happens. So for our panel, what are some of the key pieces when we talk about advanced care directives and when we talk about grief? What are the things that you all are seeing the most, and what do you want people to understand the most about it?
No particular order, just one. No particular order.
Well, I can start it off. I think one of the first things that you have to do is have the hard conversation. Nobody wants to talk about death, because when you begin to talk about death, it's like a dark area. But you have to talk about it, because if you don't, what's going to happen is that grief process is probably going to be harder, longer. Some people never come through it. It could be debilitating even to their physical being. So one of the first things you have to have a conversation about it. I know you were talking about your personal experience, and for me personally, since I've been involved with Compassion and Choices, is that I had to sit down with my children to talk about this, because if they don't know, they're going to be running around trying to hunt for papers, insurance, the other things, and having started the conversation with my kids, I begin to think like, well, I don't want there to be a fight, So now we're talking about setting up a trust, putting all the stuff in a trust. There's no fighting. Somebody's going to be responsible for it. Advanced care, are you going to have a DNR? Do not resuscitate. How do you want to be buried? I experienced that, a couple of years ago when I lost my mother. No, it was last year. Year before that, lost a cousin. Now, he was 103. My mother was 92. But they had this conversation with us about what they wanted. So it was all laid out. So but I think the first thing we have to do is we have to have the conversation, and we have to know what it is that we want to do at the time of our demise, our time of death.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I think you start with the conversation, but we have to be realistic. Grief is a part of life. Mm. It can be mitigated with information. An advanced care plan will allow us to begin to communicate around the things that you want at end of life to help them mitigate that grief. You know, it's really unfortunate that the whole conversation about death and dying doesn't take place nearly enough, if at all. No one wants to talk about it, almost as if by talking about it, you're going to hasten your demise. And it's just not true. I got a couple of examples where my father-in-law, he had stage 4 cancer. He was battling for 8 years. He lived longer than anybody ever thought he would. But he knew that he didn't want to take chemo after the second round, but he did it for his wife. We went through this conversation about what was important to him, what was his values, and it allowed us to have a more in-depth conversation about end of life, to the point where we wrote his obituary. We wrote his homegoing service, and we had a good time about it. It was a family event. We got everybody involved in it. And so it's really important, I think, especially in the African American community, to have that conversation, to realize that we can relieve your family members, your loved ones, of the decision-making burdens that come at end of life. So we're asking people to be more responsible. The way you live should be the way you die. If you live with purpose, you should die with purpose. I also would add to that is that we plan our vacations, we plan our careers, we plan our retirement, but when it comes to death and dying, mum's the word. And that has to change.
I think it also is helpful to break the hard conversation up. You don't have to necessarily have a family meeting. It can be short conversations, comments, watching a movie. You have a funeral scene. You might ask, well, what would you want yours to look like? Make it easier for people. Hard conversations don't have to be hard. The topic is hard, but we don't have to make it seem like it's going to happen tomorrow. Have conversations in bits and pieces, but making sure that you're hearing what people are saying. A lot of times we say things in passing. Listen to what people are saying, and then when it comes to make the decisions later on, if they didn't necessarily plan well, oh, I remember this was said. So we're always conscious of, we are going to live in society where people are not going to talk. I believe it'll be a long time before we get people of color to really indulge in this conversation. We want to say that. But I think that just, it's so many things that come along with it. Sometimes people don't want to have the conversation because they feel like they don't own anything. Sometimes people don't want to have the conversation because they feel like they're not prepared, or they don't have anything to leave to their family, not understanding that it might not necessarily be a house. It could be the jewelry that you have. It could be the family heirlooms that you have. And those conversations need to be had as well. But if you break it up a little bit, maybe it doesn't seem so overwhelming.
And that's a really good point about making it a part of your everyday conversation. I say every day, but it's not going to be every day. But when those opportunities arise, you just have the conversation. I think that's really, really important. Yeah.
I tend to agree with that. I remember seeing some commercials about feminine hygiene. And my father-in-law would look at it and say, oh, God, I can't believe they're talking about that. But it's part of life. And the point is that the more that we normalize it, the more that you see it, it becomes to the point where you can really talk about it. It's a natural conversation. It's not something that is foreign to you. Death is a part of life. We're all going to die. The question is, when, right? So let's plan for it. Let's have those conversations. Let's document it. I agree there are difficult conversations. I remember my mom shut my sister down one time, and she said, "Oh, Mom, we want to talk about, what you want to happen." She said, "Oh, I don't want to talk about that." And that was the end of the conversation. My mom waved her off. That was pretty much it. But in retrospect, we wish we would have came back to the conversation and had it with her. It would have lessened the grief that some of my family members felt when my mom passed away. So.
I think also the beauty of having those conversations, especially if you're a parent when your child is younger. Not necessarily like estate planning, but even the conversation about death. that I'm not going to be here forever. This is what this looks like. A lot of times, sometimes we shield our children because we feel like they're not ready for it. But the reality is, I could die tomorrow. And if my daughter is not prepared to see me go, it's going to be much harder on her, not including the business aspect of it, but just emotionally. I did not prepare her for the day that I wasn't here to take care of her. I didn't prepare her for the day that I would not be here to have a conversation. One of the things that I do is I keep a journal for my daughter, and it's letters to my daughter, and thinking of all the things that, and I plan to live forever, but all the things that she might need her mother to tell her. And if I'm not here, she can go to this book and read a letter that I wrote to her saying, you know, it's if her birthday is coming up, if you got man issues, all these different things. And that's something that I can leave to her. But having the conversation of, I'm not going to be here forever. What does that look like for you? What would you like to do if I'm not here? My father died when I was 18 years old. I wish that there would have been a lot more conversation of, I could die 10 days before your high school graduation. This is what I would like life to look like for you after that. So really starting the conversation young so that it's not hard when they get older, and then, you know, you don't have to be like, I want to have this conversation. No, we've been having the conversation.
I think one of the main things is, piggybacking off the previous episode too, is the conversation piece. You know, we tend not to want to have that conversation, but we have to. You know, and it's not easy, but it's needed. You know, so
the most loving thing you can do is relieve your loved ones of the decision-making burden at end of life. Right? That's responsible.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that, because it makes me think about the work that each of you all are doing. I know, Jim, that you are specifically working to help people kind of create those advanced care directives in a very unique way in Florida, but probably all over the country. And I know, Shalika, you are an author and have written about grief and how people can deal with grief. And I know, Greg, you are also helping people with your work across the country, specifically kind of black health issues that are most important to black people in this country. So can you all talk, specifically about the work that you're doing and how it's been able to kind of advance care directives or really help people around grief?
Sure. We have this digital platform that once people are ready to have that conversation, we've helped by walking them through the various questions to help them to document their plans, right? So we really want to get at what are their values, what are their goals, what are their preferences. And so once we get that, we document it. So it's a little bit more than just an advanced directive. An advanced directive really deals with what don't you want. Well, I don't want an NG feeding tube. I don't want to be on a respirator, those type of things. But advanced care plans, what do you want? And so we take them into that realm. What's of value to you? What do you want to do if you have, 6 months to live? What's important to you? And with this digital platform, it does a couple of unique things. Number one, you document it, and you can update it anytime you need, usually yearly. You can network it, so you can send it to, you can identify a healthcare surrogate, the person that will speak to you when you can't. And then you can network it to all the stakeholders, so your primary care doctor can get it, and other family members can get it as well. And then lastly, it's stored, and then it's connected through interoperability. Our system is connected with about 80% of the hospitals in the nation, which means that if you show up in the ER room, so does your advanced directive. And we actually want to take it to the other level. We were talking about this a little bit earlier about developing either your homegoing service or your obituary. All of that can be stored. You can even do videos. I can send a video to Elijah telling him how much he meant to me in my life, and I know I'm getting toward the end of life, but I'm ready to go. So be at peace with that. So you can do stuff like that and then release it when the time is right. So
Thank you.
I do this. Actually, I make space for people to have this conversation. I think that for grief to really be a universal experience, there isn't enough conversation about it within families, within communities. And one of the things that I've been able to do with my book, Grief, I Didn't Sign Up for This, is create space for people to share their experience, but also that other people can read or listen to other people's experience and know that they're not alone in it. It's one of those things that can be very isolating, but it doesn't have to be. So creating grief communities, going into different spaces, community groups. I've done talks at coffee shops and just made space for people to talk about their grief. A lot of times when your family is past that, it's not a safe space anymore because they're not experiencing what you're experiencing at that moment. But you can come into a space with people that all came there for the same reason, and you can share openly and candidly. Grief comes with a lot of different emotions, and you can't always say that depending on the environment you're in. So creating space for people to really be able to say, grief sucks, and I can't avoid it, and this is what I'm doing to process it. And a lot of times you can hear somebody else's experience and not only know that you're not alone, but you can hear what they did and hear that they pushed through it and feel empowered to do the same.
So you go ahead.
You know, as an ordained elder in our church, what I do is I listen. We give them an opportunity to grieve with an understanding that the grief that they're going through is theirs. It's personal. And it's not my job to sit back and say, okay, yeah, this is happening, but it's going to pass, or this. I don't know if it's going to pass. This is something that I have to be there for them throughout the process. So if you're looking at opportunity for advanced care directives, that's one thing. But what happens when the person comes in and they didn't prepare for that? The one thing that I think we have to do is we have to sit down and be compassionate enough to sit there and listen to them. Don't have the answers for them, but just be there for the individual or the family, because what you're going to find is that, and I've seen this so many times, you're going to have someone who's hurting, who lashes out. Someone's going to be misunderstood. There's going to be infighting. There's going to be all of these different things. But like you said, but if there's an opportunity to have those conversations and it becomes organic, you can prepare. You can prepare for this. But most times, folks are not. They're not prepared. I lost my son-in-law. He was 40, and he committed suicide at 40. And I had numerous conversations with him. But what I found myself doing, it's like, okay, you're intent on doing this, you're going to do it. What I have to do is I have to reach back and I have to protect your sons, your kids that's going to be left here. So it's just different opportunities. And so I think you have to look for those opportunities to just be there.
As we start to close, I have a final question for you all, and I think we'll start with you, Shalika. I mean, I was watching recently on Instagram. I think it was Tyrese posted something about, and he said, black men are out here. He lost a child, and he was like, we feel too. He's like, check on the black male friends who have lost children. We're not okay. And I just wanted to kind of open up to questions to kind of ask you and you all as well. How do we get this conversation to more black men? And how do we engage them around these pieces? What are some strategies and what are some things that you've seen, and what are some of the needs as well?
I think one of the things that we have to understand is that when a life experience is universal, it doesn't cancel anybody out. So the assumption that someone's not talking about it means that they're not affected by it is foolish. So understanding when you know that someone has experienced a loss, checking on them. Whether they say that they're okay or not, they're not always okay. So being regular about, one of the things that's really important is we say, oh, I've been thinking about you. Congratulations. Did you call me and check on me? So when we think about someone, we have to be intentional about reaching out to them and understanding that how they express it is how they express it. We don't need to try to force them to express it the way that makes us comfortable. So that might not necessarily look like sitting down with a man and saying, talk to me about your grief. But that might look like sitting down with a man or contacting a man and say, how are you today? How are you doing? Because even a little bit of expression of what's going on in their life helps. We can't assume that because someone looks the part that they're okay, because the reality is if you've experienced any level of grief, you know what a broken heart feels like. You might not necessarily know what it looks like all the time, but you know what that feels like, and you should never want anybody to go through that alone. So just being present, being intentional about, contacting the people that you know, and don't run away because they shy away from the contact. I'm going to be consistent. Okay, no problem. We don't have to talk today, but I'm going to check on you again in a couple of weeks. And understanding that because there's no expiration date on grief, grief will last a long time for a lot of people. Understanding that a couple of weeks of contacting someone or reaching out to someone might not be effective. A year later might just be the time that gives them the opportunity to share, because the reality is it takes about 18 months for you to start your grief process after you lose someone. So imagine you lose someone, you got 18 months, but you've lost other people in between there. So then you have a lot of things to process, understanding that it might not happen right away. I have to decide what I'm doing with their house, their car, their children, all these different things. I'm not even concerned with my pain yet. So give time, and don't make yourself feel good about supporting someone by forcing support on them.
Yeah, definitely.
She just made me think about something, and because of your question around men, we lose a lot of our young men now.
Yeah.
And you mentioned about cars and the kids to take care of, we talk about the gangs, and there's just so many losses. But we've never actually gone into their dens to have a conversation about them of like, hey, look, y'all out here in the world, y'all out here in these streets. These streets are dangerous. Have y'all ever thought about a power of attorney? What's going to happen to your stuff after you're gone? So maybe that's one of the areas we may want to look at. And we could possibly do it in safe spaces like barbershops.
Sure.
Absolutely. All of them ain't coming to church, but some do. They're connected. So we have to look for those areas of connectivity where we can actually help them. And so if you have a power of attorney, if you have something, and like you said, you may not have a lot, but you got something. Who's going to get your shoe collection?
Yeah.
That is a fact.
We got swag. Who's going to get it? Is it going to be saved till your child is old enough to wear it, or what? Is it even going to be valuable at that point? So those types of things I think we have to look at. Power of attorney, advanced directives, how you want to live your life, how you want to, how you want to see yourself if you die. How do you want to be remembered? How do you want to be buried? Do you want to be cremated? I told my mother that one time, said, yeah, Mom, I want to be cremated. She said, not while I'm alive. It had nothing to do with me at that point. It's like,
Right.
but
But
it's
said it.
I said it, yeah.
But you said it.
I said it, and my daughter heard it, and she's like, Dad, that makes sense. She said, I want to be cremated too. I'm like, okay, man, I'm with you. But I think we have to look at alternatives, ways of communicating.
Yeah, that is a key.
Yeah.
Again, we've got to do that.
It's almost like not making it fun, but finding that alternative way, like you say. But finding, I think, in the last episode, keep piggybacking off of that. One of our guests, Missy, mentioned a deck of cards, and making it interesting. Because in our community, we play cards, so just trying to find that way. But I really like that you have the book, and the grief. Is it a grief book? Is that what it's called? What is it?
It's an anthology, so it's a collection of stories from myself and 33 other people talking about our grief experience. And I actually started the book because my nephew and my brother passed away 2 months from each other, and I needed people to tell me about their experience to help me through mine. But I realized we didn't do enough of that. So I wanted to create space for people to be able to write their experience, but also when people read their experiences, know that they're not alone in it, because it's just not a conversation that we're having enough. We are not having the conversation at the rate that it's impacting us.
Yeah. I would just add, I think we have to change the narrative. You know, men in society have been raised to be strong providers and security. So we want to take that same principles or things that they grew up with and turn it into, well, when you die, don't you want to make sure that you're protecting and leaving things for your family? So we have to make that connection, right? So we have to flip the narrative. It's not just about you, it's about how are you going to set your family up for the future when you go. Because if you don't make these decisions will be made on your behalf.
Absolutely, yeah.
Not only that, but I think one thing that is really important is you don't want your family to lose anything that you had, because you work so hard. Black men work hard all their lives, and because you didn't do the work, your family could not enjoy any of that. Now, some people be like, they got all they got while I was alive. However, you want to make sure that what you worked so hard to build is sustainable, and that you teach your children how to maintain it, because that's a thing that we don't do as well.
Well, it sounds like this episode is this episode might have to be another part as well, because it's really good. It's really good hearing different perspectives. These episodes are very important because we want people that are viewing this to walk away with something. So conversations like this are very important. I definitely thank all you guys for your greatness and expertise, and basically definitely sharing your personal experiences as well. You know, definitely talking about the grief and just serving as an inspiration, giving that conversation inspiration to be able to, and making it interesting to get out to our community. That's really important.
Absolutely. And we want people to walk away with something. I know that's a big part of what you do here. And so, you know, for us at Compassionate Choices, we are all about saying, you know, get those advanced care directives, advanced care planning going, what you want, what you don't want, get a power of attorney, get a will. Those are things that people need to do. And then also, we do want to give you the deck of cards that we talk about. We do want to, you know, give people the book about grief. So we will get those for you, your listeners. If they are interested in getting a deck of cards, if they want that book, we will get that for them. If this show has inspired them, we got them, because we want people to have those conversations. So we appreciate you.
Absolutely.
We appreciate our guests, and hopefully we can take this show on the road.
Yeah, definitely. All right, guys, this wraps another episode 404 with Compassionate Choices. I definitely want to say thank you a lot for sponsoring Thank you, Compassionate Choices, for sponsoring 4 episodes on the Black Barbers Doc podcast. This is a great marathon that we have. I think it's just getting started. It doesn't end here. And thank you, Elijah, and the rest of the Compassionate Choices team. We did it. And this is a wrap, and we wrap this episode.
1, 2, 3, 4.